Hey guys, how's everyone doing? How did everybody like episode 5 of Dead City? The Bird Always Knows. I didn't think there was quite as much symbolism in this episode as there was in the previous one, but still some really interesting things. We learned some super interesting things about Christo, and then just some really big events went down that actually surprised me a little bit. So let's get right into it. By the way, guys, I wanted to say, first of all, before I get started, I'm still having a really hard time getting screenshots. They're putting tech in that keeps you from taking screenshots on your computer, so I'm still working out how to do it. I may end up just taking screenshots of my television, and I hate doing that because they're not very high quality, but until I figure something else out, I will be doing that. And this time I tried 2 or 3 different things and they didn't work, and I got to the point where I just needed to get this out, so I didn't do screenshots for this video. Just FYI. If anyone has any suggestions on how to get screenshots, I would appreciate them. But with that said, let's just dive in. I think the thing that this episode pivoted most on in terms of the plot of Dead City was the Croat and how loyal he is to the Dama, how badly she treats him, and how Negan was able to manipulate that. So it was kind of cool. We first see the Croat getting dressed, looking at himself in the mirror. He obviously thinks he looks pretty good. And then we see some people, we don't know who they are, they're masked, and they show up and cut the power to 6th Avenue. We see a guard outside, he gets killed, and then they go in and they cut some power lines, and where the Croat is at, the power goes out. Then we see Maggie, Armstrong, and Herschel heading through the woods. Armstrong is talking about how they may be able to get into the church through like a secret passageway because some churches have them. I think he's talking about the church that the Dama is always hanging out in. But the 3 of them are actually heading back to the Foragers' base in the woods. Now, one detail I noticed is they walk next to an old umbrella that says Italian Ice. And it's a little bit random. It's out in the woods. Obviously, it was purposely placed. It didn't have to be there for the scene, but it was put there. And it just reminded me of Daryl's never eaten frozen yogurt before, right? I've had a lot of questions about that in the last couple of weeks, and I've answered some of them as asks. So I think this is why this jumped out at me. I'm not going to say much about it, except maybe it's a reminder of something like that, and I do think it was purposely placed. Then Armstrong says something interesting. He says there should be a bridge up ahead. Otherwise, we've taken a wrong turn. Now, number one, we didn't see the bridge. Like, there was nothing in a bridge here. So I'm assuming they came across the bridge and they did not take a wrong turn because they do end up where they want to be, which is back at the Foragers' base where they live. But the point is, we didn't actually see them cross a bridge. So this dialogue must have been purposely placed, and it must be symbolic. Now, the bridge, I've done a lot of analysis on the bridges. They're always important. And the biggest thing that I think they represent is a change, like a transition. So they can, I do think falling off the bridge represents death sometimes. But very often we see characters on a bridge and they don't fall off. And we've very much connected this with Beth because there was bridges around her at Grady. There was the Sky Bridge, and there was Carol and Daryl in the van driving off the bridge. And then we just see it tangled up with her symbolism a lot. So I think it represents the characters going through change. I think very often it represents them coming close to death and then not actually dying. So there's different things like that, and you kind of have to evaluate it in any given situation. But lines like this I think are really interesting because I think they kind of defined it for us. Like Armstrong says, there should be a bridge up ahead, otherwise we've taken a wrong turn. So if the bridge represents something they need to go through in order to survive, and maybe they need to change or transform in some way in order to keep surviving, and so they need to go through that. And if they don't, then they've taken a wrong turn. It's just kind of an interesting thing to throw into the episode, the dialogue. Maggie and Herschel sit on a bench for a few minutes, and she asks him again about the drawing he did of the Dama. She doesn't know who the Dama is, doesn't know her name, so she just calls her that woman, and asks if he, one more time, if he was telling the truth about just having seen this woman on a billboard. And he says yes, so he's lying still, and then he asks what Negan said to her when she met with Negan, and she just said that Negan said they should go home. And they're going to. So then we see Negan going to Dama's room. He hears her talking inside, so he opens the door, and she's talking to the mouse, like, encouraging it to find its way through the maze. So then Negan steps out again, and this is just important because he's thinking about that mouse and how much she dotes on that, or it's a rat, actually. I'm sorry, I keep calling it a mouse. It actually is a rat. He's thinking about how much she dotes on that rat and how important it is to her, right? And that's going to end up being important later in the episode. So then the Croat comes and tells her about, the electricity going out on 6th Street, and she's very unhappy about it. She breaks her alcohol glass, which just reminded me of Beth and Daryl. I mean, got alcohol in it. She smashes it kind of like Daryl smashes the schnapps, but the thing that reminded me most, like, as soon as she broke it, Daryl's line came into my head it was Beth's line when she said, "Did you have to break the glass?" And she was actually talking about the picture glass, but even so, it just kind of stuck in my head as kind of a parallel to that. So she's talking about this and how they have to keep going. They really want to get Christos on their side. He's the only holdout that the Dama wants to bring kind of into the fold. So then Negan says, okay, but after he's on board, we're done, right? I'll get my family, and that's the deal. And she's obviously very reluctant to agree to that, even though that was the deal. And she says that it will be. She says, I pinky swear everything will be fine. And, we kind of don't believe her. And Negan doesn't really believe her, but there's not a whole lot he can do about it. And then she goes back to the rat in the maze once again. When Maggie and Herschel and Armstrong get to the Foragers' base, they go through the gate, but they find that Narvaez has taken over because Ginny told her that Negan was still alive. She arrests Armstrong for lying about having killed Negan. Maggie tries to back him up, but it doesn't really work. And so then Narvaez tells Maggie that she wants her to go back to Negan, offer their surrender, and bring him and the Croat to the boathouse so that they can ambush them. And Maggie tries to tell her this is probably not going to work, it's not a good idea, but Narvaez has this whole plan about bringing all the soldiers, the Barazzi as they call them, through the elephant grass and letting the dead take them out. And maybe that would work, maybe not, but, obviously Maggie is very suspicious, but Narvaez says they're going to hold Herschel hostage until Maggie does what they want. So we see her heading back out, supposedly to go back to Negan and offer him this. Then the Croat, in trying to investigate what happened with the power, finds something. He finds where they cut the lines. And then he finds something underneath that fuse box, and he smiles. So obviously he found something that he likes. Negan, meanwhile, is going to Christos, and the Dama told the Croat that she only wanted Negan to go alone. So he does. The other thing is Narvaez put Ruxara, who is the leader of the Foragers, the woman who's their leader, and they're both in this little room together, this little imprisonment situation. And this is where we get the title of the episode. She talks about an uncle she was really close to who had a little yellow bird, and it was a really intelligent little bird. And he had a box full of colorful paper with riddles written on them, and would have the bird pick one out with its beak, and then it would that would be the riddle that he would read to them that they would try to solve. And she said the bird always knew. And what she meant by that, I think, is that the riddle was always relevant to them and what they were going through at the time. Then she talks about her uncle being conscripted in the Iraq War, and he died there. But she said it wasn't a war he knew anything about or had anything to do with, so she would consider that dying for nothing. Because that's what they were talking about. Armstrong said something about how he didn't mind dying, and he kind of expected to die at some point, but he didn't want to die for nothing. So a few things about this. First of all, the bird symbolism is big in Beth symbolism. She was the songbird. We've seen a lot of bird symbolism. Well, first of all, around her. Remember that she had the bird cage in her cell in 401, And we've seen those bird cages with other characters who disappeared and then came back. The biggest one recently was Connie. We did see one around Glenn when he, let's see, what was it? 603, and then he showed up in Heads Up, which was 607. We saw it in 607, and it's like he disappeared and came back, even though that was a really small instance. Everybody thought he was dead for a while. They really did, because and even the audience kind of thought he was dead, or it was like split down the middle, because it looked like he got eaten by walkers. So the bird cages usually represent someone who leaves and comes back again. We did see one around Beth, one of our first evidences that we pointed to, right? More recently, we saw one around Connie in one of the latest seasons of the flagship show. We saw one right before she disappeared in the caves, and then it took a lot longer. I think it took a season for her to come back, but she did, and she was alive, and she and Daryl hugged, and there was apples and just all kinds of symbolism flying around. So there is bird symbolism around Beth. There's also the songbird angle, and this was a little yellow songbird, I think she said, Roxara said. We also see bird symbolism really entangled up with just Beth symbolism. We saw it in a big way in Fear the Walking Dead with first Madison, who left and then came back, turned out to be alive, and then with Alicia, who did the same thing. So it's a big deal, okay? So just seeing the symbolism is big. The other thing that really jumps out at me about this is that the format of it is a lot like the story that Rick told in 510, which is the Music Box episode, when he talked about his grandfather, I think it was his grandfather, going off to war. And it's just, in his case, his grandfather lived. In this case, Roxara is saying that her uncle died, but still, it's a story about a family member who was very wise in their own way, going off to war, to fight somebody's war. So it just reminded me a lot of that, and that was a major foreshadow. It was also in the episode where the music box wakes up, so there's a lot of important elements here. And then just saying that the bird was wise, and the riddles are interesting too. Just mentioning riddle, like is Beth's disappearance a riddle? Is that part of what they're trying to say here? That there are riddles that the bird is taking out of the box, and the bird always knows, as though, really it means that the riddles are wise, but they're still, they're playing around with their words here, and it's kind of fun. So that was super interesting. That was one of the big ones that caught my attention. Okay, then we have Negan being taken to Christos, and it does seem that Christos died here. I don't know that he's going to be a big character moving forward. I assume he died. They say that. We didn't specifically see them taking him out by hitting him in the head, and I don't know, maybe there's a parallel there between him and Beth to not show his face again. But they do basically say that they killed him, so I'm pretty sure he's dead. But here's the thing. When Negan, he goes, so he's standing out in front of where Christos lives, and then Christos' men come and get him, and he's taken upstairs at gunpoint. There is a shot where he's going up the stairs that reminded me a lot of Grady. It would be the time when Rick and Daryl showed up with the prisoners, that they were going to do the prisoner exchange, and we just see them walking up the steps. There's a lot of keys being turned in locks as they go up to the 5th floor to do the exchange. And this just kind of visually looked like that. But it was Negan being taken to Christo. So I had this kind of fleeting thought. It's not super obvious or super heavy, but just kind of had a little bit of a Grady vibe there. Then he goes in to talk to Christos. And if you remember what I said before about the church and what happened at the church, Christos seemed like he had a lot of Beth parallels, but he's also kind of villainous. So I was going, I don't know if he's an anti-villain or if he just seems villainous or what. Well, we kind of get the answer here. He does have a lot of parallels to Beth, and the first thing I noticed is that he had 2 dogs down by his feet. Now, of course, anybody could have a dog, but it's just interesting that a character that is so heavily paralleled with Beth would have dogs around him. I also noticed here that he had scars on his cheeks. They don't look exactly like Beth's scars, but they're in the same general area, so that's interesting. He seems to be being kind of a douchebag about things, and he's threatening Negan, and he's saying, you made a mistake, we're basically going to kill you. Then all of a sudden, 2 little girls come running out of the back room, and not only do they talk to him, they're speaking Dutch, so, this must be his people, speak that as their first language. And then Negan can see other people in the back rooms, women and children, and there's a man holding a baby, and there's a whole community of people that Christos is taking care of. So 2 things. One, Christos is not as much of a douchebag as he has led people to believe. He is wearing a tough guy mask in order to protect his people. But this makes Negan realize that he's actually probably a pretty decent guy. It would be no different than Rick or Daryl putting on a tough guy exterior in order to deal with their enemies, when really they're totally decent guys who have families. This is more who Christos is. And Negan didn't realize that before. He thought he was really brutal, more like the Croat or the Dama or even Bruegel, right? And he's not. I mean, Negan might even be seeing Rick in this guy, So that's interesting, because now we suddenly understand why they would give him more parallels to Beth, because he's not actually a bad guy. He's just pretending to be. And he's actually protecting people. He's protecting, including little kids, which is something that we always say will be the case when Beth comes back. And suddenly all the parallels that happened in the church make a lot more sense. The other thing this reminded me of, that I'm sure some of you probably thought of, is the Vatos gang. The Vatos gang was from season 1. Rick went and found them. Remember, they were acting like really tough as nails Latino gangsters. And then the guy's grandma comes out and says he's a good boy, and Rick is totally confused. And it turns out they're good people, and they were just putting on that front. They got taken out right after that, so by the time Rick and Daryl and their group went back at the beginning of season 2, the Vatos gang had been slaughtered, so they're not really around anymore. But this is very similar to that as well, just putting on a mask in order to make sure they can survive, because they don't trust the people who are around them, who might try to harm them, when really they're good people who are trying to take care of a community and protect a community. So Negan talks to him really earnestly and says that, now I can see what kind of position you're in. That changes things. So Negan theoretically could have allied with this guy, but of course it doesn't quite work that way. So then we see it starts to rain, and we see Maggie go back to the foragers' base. She clocks the guard and goes back in, and she almost lets out Armstrong and Roxana, but Armstrong's telling her to leave, and if Narvaez finds her, catches her, they're going to kill Herschel, so she locks them back in again and says, well, they're not going to catch me. Of course, that doesn't work out so well either. So then we go back to Christos, who is explaining everything to Negan and kind of his side of things and how it seems to him and how he has people to protect and all of that. And Negan says, I totally get it, man. I understand, but you cannot sit this one out. You're going to have to choose a side, And he's basically encouraging him to still fight for the Dama, because that would be the best way for him to survive. He'll get the biggest seat at the table if he is loyal to her. Obviously, Negan is not that loyal to her, but I think he's giving this guy the best advice he can. Then the Croat shows up. And it turns out what the Croat found that made him smile under the fuse box was it was Christos's knife. So it was probably Christos, even though we didn't see his face, who cut the wires. And it did occur to me that this knife is a little reminiscent of Beth's knife. It's got white in the handle. So I thought that was interesting. I'm not saying it is her knife or anything, but it kind of looks like it. So yet another parallel there. And the Croat basically decides he's going to kill Christos for messing with their power and double-crossing them. So he's been letting gas leak into the room. It's affecting even Negan. And the Croat and some of his guys put on gas masks so it doesn't affect them. And then once everyone passes out from the gas, they go through and start killing everybody. He does say he'll let the women and children live, but of course they will have lost their protectors and probably men that they love and care for, so it's going to be really difficult for them now. And I noticed that even the dogs went down. We don't see them killing the dogs. We don't know if they did, but because of the gas, we see the dogs laying on the ground. And like I said, if this is meant to be a parallel to Grady, we don't specifically see them taking action that would kill Christos. I mean, it'll be interesting if he turns out to be alive, if he survives it. And I'm not necessarily saying I think that will happen. I think it could be one of these things where he's a parallel to Beth up to a point. But I'm not saying they're going to do a resurrection arc with him. But, just as we saw Beth got shot and we have established that that gunshot was not necessarily fatal, but we certainly didn't see them stab her in the brain so she wouldn't turn, or do something like cut off her head like they did with Herschel or Glenn. You know what I mean? It's like we didn't see the blow that would absolutely make it so she couldn't come back. It was similar here. We didn't see that with Christos. We just saw him go down, and then they started killing all his men, so I'm assuming that they killed him too. And then the dogs were there. They made sure to show us the dogs too, which I think was very intentional. The Croat very much justifies what he did, but Negan knows the Dama is going to be angry. And, Negan himself is angry. He didn't want that to happen to Christos. Back in the Foragers' base, Narvaez asks Herschel what happened between Maggie and Negan. And he tells her that this guy killed his dad. And she wants to know why Maggie didn't kill him. And Herschel tells about how he got a chance to kill Negan, but he missed. And Maggie, meanwhile, is stealthily coming up behind Narvaez and grabs her. But then Ginny comes out with a gun and puts it on Herschel because she doesn't want Maggie to kill Narvaez. And Maggie's really shocked that Ginny is doing all of this. So we have Negan and the Croat going to see the Dama. Now, this part's interesting. Negan gives the Croat kind of a pep talk about how the Dama still isn't treating him very well, and she's not the end all be all. Don't worry about her. And he says, "I have your back." So he's getting the Croat to be loyal to him because he's being nice to him. That's pretty much what he's doing here. Back in where Armstrong and Roxana, the leader, are imprisoned together, she has him pick a rock out of a little bag and tells him a riddle, basically, kind of what she was saying her uncle used to do. And she talks about a man who comes to a fork in the road, and he can either go back to his past from before, or he can move forward to his future. And both paths have pitfalls. There's no way to know which one he's going to pick or which one would be better. And she says he's getting old and he only has enough energy for one last journey. So I think that's all very foreshadowing, maybe especially for Roxana, I was going to say, because in this case, she's really close to the end of her mortal journey anyway. But maybe for Armstrong, too. We'll see where they go with that. But we have her doing... There's a few things we could read into this. We have her doing the riddle thing. The fact that it's a rock that she picks out, because in the story about her uncle, it was pieces of paper. Now she's using rocks. And that could be more of the rock in the road symbolism. I talked about that a few weeks ago because there was the Rockaway towing truck, right? We did some on that. So there's that. And then the fork in the road with two different paths, it just reminds me of all the A-B symbolism. And we've talked before about how Beth kind of jumped the timeline. She's going to be gone for all of these seasons on a different timeline, and then she'll jump back when she crosses paths with them again. So it could be something pointing toward that as well. Once Negan and the Croat talk to the Dama, Negan tries to, support the Croat and say that it wasn't his fault, but the Dama isn't really having any of that. And the Croat stands up for himself and starts yelling at the Dama. And see, I wasn't sure exactly what Negan's plan was when I was watching it, but at the end of the scene, he smiles. And I was like, okay, so he definitely wanted that to happen. That's what he was going for. He knew that if he... the main reason anybody doesn't stand up to someone like that is because they feel like they're alone, and they'll have to bear the punishment of it or the brunt of it alone. And as soon as he has someone like Negan, who has the Dama's ear, who is sticking up for him, that makes the Croat more brave. And it's especially interesting that Negan mentioned the rat when he was talking to the Croat. He said she treats that rat better than she treats you. Then the Croat specifically mentioned that when he yelled at the Dama here. And again, this was all by design. This is Negan figuring this out. You could tell that the Dama was quite shocked that he yelled at her, because he doesn't usually do that. And she got up and left. She left the situation 100% and said, "We'll speak about this later when you've gotten a hold of yourself." And then we kind of see Negan smile. This is going exactly the way he wants it to. Then comes this big scene out in the yard of the Foragers' domain, where all this crazy stuff goes down, right? Narvaez is planning to hang Roxana, Armstrong, and Maggie. She's going to hang all three of them. And she does hang Roxana, who, kind of gives some last pearls of wisdom to her people, but then she dies. And they put Maggie up there, and interestingly, as soon as Roxana dies, all of her people start keening, like they did before, when Joan died. And of course, this excites all the walkers, because they can hear it, and it's dark, and she's got a fire going. Narvaez is not being the most intelligent about the situation. And soon enough, the walkers get in, start killing people. So unfortunately, most of the Foragers were killed. One of the walkers knocks the stool out from under Maggie, and unlike Roxana, her neck doesn't break, but she's strangling, right? But Ginny This is a moment when both Ginny and Herschel, I think, had kind of a come to Jesus moment where they snapped out of their more teenage drama justification and, you know, had to reset their priorities here. So, of course, Herschel didn't want Maggie to die, and he tried to stop it. He couldn't really on his own until the walkers got in and made chaos of some things. But the same was true of Ginny. She kind of realized the horror of what was happening and not only saved Maggie, but, you know, I think she's more on their side now, and she's going to be less of a stumbling block for Maggie moving forward, which is good. Ginny just does get hurt. I wasn't sure if she'd been bitten the first time I watched it, but I went back and looked, and it's really not a bite. When the walker came at her and kind of stumbled into her, she got impaled on a metal bar, and it caused that injury to her back. But it could be a significant injury. I mean, especially as it looked metal to me, she could end up getting infected. She could get tetanus. So I'm not sure where they're going with that, but they did make a point to show the injury. And I think it's good that this happened too, because Herschel is really starting to come around, which is good. So that's pretty much what happens. Navarre is killed by Roxana, so there's some poetic justice for you. But in the end, Maggie, Armstrong, Ginny, and Herschel all escape and get back into the building, which is good, where they're a little bit safer for a while. Then we see the Dama go into her quarters. She's lighting candles. She sees the dead rat on the ground, which is gross, by the way, and is obviously very horrified by that. Then we jump back to Maggie and Armstrong and all of them, and we have Herschel finally telling Maggie the truth. And I think I have been a little bit unsure about where they're going with Herschel. Are they going to make him like a full-on villain at some point, or is he going to come around? And right now it's looking like he's coming around. He finally told Maggie the truth. You know, he's finally understanding that maybe the Dama was manipulating him a little bit. And anyway, so I was glad to see that. I really don't want him to be a full-on villain. So hopefully it continues to go this way. Of course, we're only a little bit more than halfway through the season, so we'll see. Then they get this rhythmic knock at the door. And I assumed that this would be Negan, because I'm pretty sure this is the same knock that Negan used often during All Out War. I remember people discussing the symbolism of this particular rhythmic knock. But it's actually not Negan, it's Bruegel. And we're not entirely sure why he's there or what he's up to, but now Maggie and Armstrong and Bruegel are in the same place, so this should be interesting. And then we have the Croat knocking on the Dama's door, and he goes in, sees the rat, and again, this was such an ingenious setup by Negan, because with the Croat having specifically mentioned the rat when he yelled at her, of course she's going to think he killed the rat. She's not going to suspect anybody but him, right? So he comes in, they start yelling at each other, she accuses him, and of course he's going, I didn't kill your rat, what are you talking about? But they start yelling at each other, and we see her bite him. I knew that thing about her biting people was going to come back. We see it here. And he pushes her, and she falls down, and something heavy, like a metal rack of some kind, falls down on top of her. And meanwhile, one of the lanterns gets knocked over and starts a fire. And it's kind of actually interesting, the psychology of it. If you watch, she starts screaming help, and he moves to help her. It just goes to show how loyal he is to her, how brainwashed he is. Like, she says jump, and he says how high. She says help, and he moved to help her. But then he caught himself and stepped back and ended up not helping her, and the Dama dies here. And that was something that surprised me. We're only a little more than halfway through the season. I assumed she would, it wouldn't have surprised me if she died at the end of the season, but I assumed it would be more like the season finale or something, right? But no, she's their main villain, and they killed her off here, so that's kind of interesting. We're not sure how they're going to pivot. Is Bruegel going to become the main villain? I don't know. We'll see. But the point is, she dies. That's pretty big. And then we see Negan in his cell that they used to keep him in, scraping blood and guts off his shoe, which, again, gross. But it's obvious that he is the one who killed the rat, and so he set it up this way. And he did it on purpose, because he knows very well that the Dama is not going to ever let him go. She says she will, but he knows she's not going to, stay true to her word. So yeah, we had a lot of massive dust-ups here. Most of the foragers got killed, Narvaez got killed, and the Dama got killed. And probably Christos got killed. I'm just going to go ahead and assume he's dead unless they tell us otherwise. So what are we left with here? We've got the Croat and Negan, of course, and we've got Bruegel, who I think is kind of the wild card at this point. And yeah, then we have Negan, who doesn't really want to be there. But I maintain we don't know for sure that his family is coming. She keeps saying that, but did she even find his family, or was she just saying that so that he would do what she wanted? We really don't know. So I don't know if he would want to hang around and wait for his family to get there or what. But now we also have, because Bruegel is with Maggie, and especially watching the preview for next week, I'm assuming he's going to take her back. If not for Bruegel showing up there, Maggie and Herschel would probably have just left in the morning and gone back home. You know, they don't have any reason to stay. But then Bruegel arrives, and, you know, he's probably going to take them, whether they want to go or not, at gunpoint or whatever, back to the city. So it'll be interesting to see what happens here. It'll be interesting to see the shape of the whole season. Because, like I said, I just didn't really expect them to kill off the Dama at this point. That was surprising, but interesting. I don't mind it. I'm really kind of excited to see where it goes now. So, yeah, like I said, not quite as much to pick apart in this episode. There was the Christo stuff, which was probably the biggest thing, and then there's the bird and the whole riddle and how that kind of ties back to Rick's speech from 510. Those were the major things that I saw here, and they are pretty major, at least in terms of the symbolism. But I don't have a whole lot more to say about them. So, I do know that there were some interesting things that happened this week on social media. I will address those in my next Asks video. And yeah, I'll be back with that later in the week. Let me know how you liked this episode and if you saw anything that I missed. Okay? Talk soon.